So I recently, finally, read through the entirety of the collected poems of Sylvia Plath. It took me a little while because collected poems, well, books of poems in general, take me longer to read than prose books, whether fiction or nonfiction, just because poetry requires a lot more time, I think, to digest than prose. I think poetry is kind of the most taxing literary art form out there, rivaled perhaps only by like experimental fiction or horribly dense nonfiction like philosophy. But even those, I think aren't quite as difficult as poetry often can be. Even a poet who's as accessible as I think Sylvia Plath often is. And so this collected poems by her is organized chronologically, actually. So in a lot of collected poems or complete poems by individual poets, you will find the work in the volume organized into the separate individual volumes that the poems were originally published in, right? So you'll have a section of the book that's one volume that was published back in whatever year it was, and then the next section will be another volume that the poet published. And so that's how the collection is organized. This collection is organized much differently. In this collection, the poems are not organized by the volumes they were published in. Sylvia Plath only published really two collections of poems in her life, which were The Colossus and Ariel. And there were a couple of posthumous collections. But the poems in here are not organized by those collections. They are organized by the dates when they were written. So there's no kind of regard given to the volume that the poems appeared in. They're just organized by when she wrote them. And so occasionally you get cases where a poem like, for example, the poem Tulips, which is one of my favorite of her poems, is fairly early in this volume, even though it was published in Ariel, in the collection that was published just after her death. It's collected in here, if I can find it very quickly, it's collected in here at about that point, right? About that point. And so that's page 160 out of probably about 330 pages of this volume that are actual poems, because it was written in March of 1961, right? But Tulips was published in the volume Ariel, and most of the other iconic poems from Ariel are from like way back in this part of the book. So the collection's organized unconventionally. Anyway, so enough throat clearing about how the collection is done and all this. As I've said in previous videos, I find reviewing collections of poems really, really tough. I still, even though I read a lot of poetry and I love poetry, I have a hard time talking about it in a way that feels substantive. And so what I thought that I would do for this video to at least appreciate this volume a bit is just read a handful of poems from it. And I want the poems to represent a couple of old favorites of mine that I had encountered before reading this all the way through, and a couple that I either discovered, or I think it's more, or it's less that I discovered them and more that I developed a new appreciation for them. Because most of the poems that I really, really loved that I found here, most of them, not all of them, were from Ariel, from the collection Ariel that was published just after Sylvia Plath died. And that's very late work, most of it. Most of it appears towards the end of this collection. And really, that work that she published very close to the end of her life, I think is what has made her immortal, what has made Sylvia Plath immortal as a writer. And that is a little unfortunate, because that means for a big chunk of this volume, you're sort of reading it and you're sort of like, all right, this is pretty good, but it's not Lady Lazarus. It's not Daddy. It doesn't have that searing fire that we expect from Plath if we've encountered her in her most famous poems. A lot of the poems that are early in this volume are decent, but they're not necessarily anything you're going to read and think this is an immortal work, right? This is going to last for centuries. But then you get to the poems she wrote in 1962, 1963, and it's just Titanic masterpiece after Titanic masterpiece there. It's really sad to me that Sylvia Plath died as young as she did. It's sad that she died so young because it's always sad when someone dies young. Of course, it's just a personal tragedy. But stepping back from that for just a minute, it's also tragic because just looking at what she was writing towards the end of her life and how magnificent it was compared to what came before, it just boggles the mind where she could have gone if she had lived to the ripe old age of 90 or something. Sylvia Plath could still be alive if she hadn't taken her own life when she was 30. She could still be alive now. She'd be very old, but she could be still alive, So anyway, I got a little bit sidetracked. I want to read a handful of poems. I believe it'll be 4 that I have bookmarked here. And they constitute a couple of poems that I have developed a new appreciation for that weren't necessarily favorites, and a couple that very much were favorites of mine before I came to reading the complete poems by her. So, I'm going to start with a poem called Nick and the Candlestick, which I had read before because I'd read Ariel, but I didn't have strong memories of it, but now I do from reading it this time. So here is Nick and the Candlestick. This poem is from, in case you're curious, it was written in October of 1962. It's dated in this volume to the 29th of October, 1962. So here it is. I am a miner. The lights burn blue. Waxy stalactites drip and thicken. Tears the earthen womb exudes from its dead boredom. Black bat airs wrap me, raggy shawls, cold homicides. They weld to me like plums. Old cave of calcium icicles, old echoer. Even the newts are white, those holy joes. And the fish, Christ, they are panes of ice, a vice of knives, a piranha religion, drinking its first communion out of my live toes. The candle gulps and recovers its small altitude. Its yellows hearten. Oh, love, how did you get here? Oh, embryo remembering, even in sleep, your crossed position. The blood blooms clean in you, Ruby. The pain you wake to is not yours. Love, love, I have hung our cave with roses, with soft rugs, the last of Victoriana. Let the stars plummet to their dark address. Let the mercuric atoms that cripple drip into the terrible well. You are the one solid the spaces lean on, envious. You are the baby in the barn. I mean, chef's kiss, honestly. I feel like there's something quasi-religious going on in this poem. Like, it almost feels like a sort of religious experience it's describing. I'm not sure. That's the thing with a lot of Sylvia Plath poems, is they seem so accessible, but then they're also it's really hard to pin down sometimes what's even being talked about. For me, sometimes. So, anyway, that's Nick and the Candlestick. I love it. I hope you did as well, despite the fact that I tripped over myself a little bit at the end there. Next poem is going to be another that I developed a new appreciation for, and it incidentally appears right after Nick and the Candlestick in this volume. This is also dated to the 29th of October, 1962. So let me give it a read. This is Purda, or Purda. I'm actually not sure how you pronounce that word, but here it is. Jade, stone of the side, the agonized side of green Adam. I smile cross-legged, enigmatical, shifting my clarities. So valuable, how the sun polishes this shoulder. And should the moon, my indefatigable cousin, rise with her cancerous pallors, dragging trees, little bushy polyps, little nets, my visibilities hide. I gleam like a mirror. At this facet the bridegroom arrives, lord of the mirrors. It is himself he guides in among these silk screens, these rustling appurtenances. I breathe, and the mouth veil stirs its curtain. My eye veil is a concatenation of rainbows. I am his. Even in his absence, I revolve in my sheath of impossibilities, priceless and quiet among these parakeets, macaws. O chatterers, attendants of the eyelash, I shall unloose one feather, like the peacock. Attendants of the lip, I shall unloose one note, shattering the chandelier of air that all day flies its crystals a million ignorance. Attendants, and at his next step I shall unloose. I shall unloose from the small jeweled doll he guards like a heart, the lioness, the shriek in the bath, the cloak of holes. Again, just chef's kiss. It sounds like it's a poem kind of about breaking loose from an overbearing male partner, it sounds to me. What I love rhetorically about Plath is she doesn't always use like rhyme or explicit alliteration, but she uses sort of the sonics of poems there are still echoes, sonic echoes within poems, between stanzas and between lines. You know, she uses a lot of maybe not as much alliteration, but a lot of assonance, where like the vowels inside of words sort of sound the same between different lines. So anyway, that's Purda. I love that poem. I'm gonna skip over the poem that comes right after that for now, and I'm gonna skip ahead to the first poem I want to read that is an old favorite of mine. This one is dated from the 16th of November, 1962. It is called Years. All right, so here it is. They enter as animals from the outer space of holly, where spikes are not the thoughts I turn on, like a yogi, but greenness, darkness so pure they freeze and are. Oh God, I am not like you in your vacuous black, stars stuck all over, bright stupid confetti. Eternity bores me. I never wanted it. What I love is the piston in motion. My soul dies before it. And the hooves of the horses, their merciless churn. And you, great stasis, what is so great in that? Is it a tiger this year? This roar at the door? Is it a Christus? The awful God bit in him, dying to fly and be done with it? The bloodberries are themselves. They are very still. The hooves will not have it. In blue distance, the pistons hiss. Yeah, I love that ending, the pistons hiss. It has a very kind of menacing sound to it. But I feel like this poem, to me, the way that I read it anyway, is it's kind of about that idea of being in sort of eternal bliss, sort of the idea of being in heaven, the idea of being in eternal happiness and being immortal. Or maybe it's in conversation less with the idea of heaven in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and maybe more with the idea of like nirvana from Buddhism or other Eastern religions, where the emphasis is on sort of attaining enlightenment by letting go of worldly desires. And I think what she's writing about here is sort of this affirmation of being in the world, of desiring, of yearning, of going after what you yearn for and your desires and the process of the world. I hope that makes some sense. But I love Years. It's been a favorite of mine for a while. And now I come to the last poem that is it's dated from 1963. It's from the 1st of February. And this is Words. And I was blown away when I read this. I think this is another one that I would have read previously and just was bowled over by on a reread. So here is Words. Axes, after whose stroke the wood rings, and the echoes traveling off from the center like horses. The sap wells like tears, like the water striving to re-establish its mirror over the rock that drops and turns. A white skull eaten by weedy greens. Years later, I encounter them on the road. Words dry and riderless, the indefatigable hoof taps, while from the bottom of the pool, fixed stars govern a life. So I think, I guess given the title, I read this as kind of a poem about the power of language, the power of words, the power of probably poetry in particular. It's one of these poems about poems, which poets seem to really like writing poems about poems or about poets or about poetry, which is kind of like literary masturbation, you could say, but I love it. I love it. So anyway, so the last poem I want to read is one of my favorite poems of all time. It shouldn't shock anyone because it's one of Plath's most famous poems as well. I'm going to go ahead and try to do a reading of Lady Lazarus, which, as I said, one of my favorite poems of all time. I, for a while, had this poem memorized, and I still do have chunks of it memorized. I wouldn't necessarily trust myself to try to do it off the cuff from memory here, but I just think it's remarkable. So, here's Lady Lazarus. I have done it again. 1 year in every 10 I manage it. A sort of walking miracle. My skin bright as a Nazi lampshade. My right foot a paperweight. My face a featureless, fine Jew linen. Peel off the napkin, O my enemy. Do I terrify? The nose, the eye pits, the full set of teeth, the sour breath will vanish in a day. Soon, soon the flesh the grave cave ate will be at home on me, and I a smiling woman. I am only 30, and like the cat, I have 9 times to die. This is number 3. What a trash to annihilate each decade, what a million filaments. The peanut-crunching crowd shoves in to see them unwrap me hand and foot, the big strip tease. Gentlemen, ladies, these are my hands, my knees. I may be skin and bone, nevertheless, I am the same identical woman. The first time it happened, I was 10. It was an accident. The second time, I meant to last it out and not come back at all. I rocked shut as a seashell. They had to call and pick the worms off me like sticky pearls. Dying is an art, like everything else. I do it exceptionally well. I do it so it feels like hell. I do it so it feels real. I guess you could say I've a call. It's easy enough to do it in a cell. It's easy enough to do it and stay put. It's the theatrical comeback in broad day to the same place, the same face, the same brute, amused shout. A miracle that knocks me out. There is a charge for the eyeing of my scars. There is a charge for the hearing of my heart. It really goes. And there is a charge, a very large charge, for a word or a touch or a bit of blood or a piece of my hair or my clothes. So, Herr Doctor. So, Herr Enemy. I am your opus. I am your valuable. The pure gold baby that melts to a shriek. I turn and burn. Do not think I underestimate your great concern. Ash, ash, you poke and stir. Flesh, bone, there is nothing there. A cake of soap, a wedding ring, a gold filling. Hair God, Hair Lucifer, beware, beware. Out of the ash I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air. So that's Lady Lazarus. I feel like that poem, as I read it, I think it's my first time reading it, reciting it on this channel, and I was just struck by how that poem feels kind of like an epic. I mean, it's a couple pages long, right? In this copy, it's maybe 2.5 pages long, which is not necessarily a short poem, but it feels shorter than it really is because the lines are very short. And yet it feels like an epic. Like when you get to the end there, where she's going, Herr Doctor, Herr Lucifer, it feels like you've been through so much, and yet she's so economical in the telling of it. And I mean, it's almost, you could say, like proto-minimalist the way she does it. I just think it's brilliant. And then another thing I want to touch on, because it recurs a couple times in her poems, is the use of Holocaust imagery. You see that in Lady Lazarus. You also see it in one of her other most famous poems, which is called Daddy, where she explicitly compares herself to a Jew being persecuted by the Nazis. And here we have some allusions to that as well. And I, for a long time, kind of was a little bit troubled by this. You know, I loved the poems, but I was a little bit troubled by the idea of this upper middle class, more or less, white, non-Jewish woman comparing herself to Jews in the Holocaust. And I didn't really know what to do with that, because I loved the poem so much. And yet this sort of bugged me a little bit. And I know that there are people who it bugs. And what someone said to me once that really put this in a different perspective for me about her use of Nazi imagery, and I'd be curious to hear the thoughts of anyone watching, is that, yes, it is problematic that she is using Holocaust imagery. It is problematic. And that's kind of the point. The idea here is that someone in Sylvia Plath's mindset, or the mindset of the character she's creating in the poems, if you don't want to say that they're directly about her, even though so many of them are autobiographical, that they are problematic, but you could envision someone in the mindset, the very disordered mindset that Sylvia Plath often was in, being horribly depressed, right? Much of her life. And at the time she was writing these poems. These are ideas that someone in that mindset might have about themselves, right? That they are a Jew who's been persecuted or sent off to the concentration camps, you know. And so it is problematic, but it's also coming from a place of profound disorder in the person, right? And that's part of the point. And that really made me see this in a different light. That made me much more accepting of it, I guess. I mean, it is still problematic, but that's the point, right? So I hope that makes sense. Anyway, I will leave it at that. Let me know, if you're watching, what your favorite Sylvia Plath poem is, if you have one. Whether you've read this whole collection or not, just let me know what your favorite Sylvia Plath poem is. And just for kicks, because it was a really great gateway into her poetry for me, I'm going to see if I can find some of the audio recordings of Sylvia Plath reading her own poems, and leave links to them below for anyone who's curious, because she does a great job. She's so great at reading her own poems. And my own reading of Lady Lazarus, the way that I read it, was very influenced by the way that she reads it. So anyway, I'll leave links to those. But otherwise, I will end it there and talk to you all soon. Bye.